What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Today we're going to be breaking down the best game on the Week 4 slate between the Houston Roughnecks and the Dallas Renegades. Going to be talking about all the fantasy relevant players in this one, giving you guys some insight in who to start and sit. But hey, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button before we get started, which is right now. Alright guys, so breaking this game down, highest over-under on the week, right now sitting at 49.5. Definitely could hit the over on this one pretty easily, and Vegas is having a hard time setting this one, figuring out who's going to win. Right now they're favoring Houston by 1.5 points, but don't be surprised if and when Dallas wins this game. Both of these teams have incredibly strong offenses and pretty average defenses, at least in terms of the XFL, so this could very easily turn into a barn burner and a high-scoring game. It's going to be the most targeted game, I would imagine, in DFS, and if you have guys on either of these teams in your daily or your season-long leagues, you're probably going to be pretty happy with the outcome that you're going to get. But you guys you're here for fantasy analysis, so let's get into it. We'll begin by looking at all the players on the Houston Roughnecks. Alright, now starting with the quarterback here, you shouldn't need any convincing at this point to start Phillip Walker every week, especially not this one. The only quarterback with double-digit touchdowns right now and hasn't turned the ball over since week 1. This is the highest over-under game by far, and there's a reason for that. It's a lot to do with how Phillip Walker's been playing. Definitely start him this week, number 1 quarterback in our rankings. Looking at the running backs here now, the Renegades have been pretty average on defense, especially against the run, but James Butler is the only running back in the league to have more than 60% of his team's running back carries. He also looks pretty freaking good on those carries, averaging 5.7 yards per carry, and is involved in the pass game. This is an easy start if you have James Butler, and should probably be pretty heavily rostered even in DFS, even though his price tag has gone up. Looking at the wide receivers, both of these teams surrender the most points to opposing fantasy wide receivers, again aiding to that over-under going up so much. Now, Cam Phillips is elite. We know this now. He has 7 touchdowns already through 3 weeks. He's had 2 hat-trick games. He's had 3 touchdowns in the same game. He's a must start, and well, even though he's incredibly expensive in DFS, is probably still going to be heavily owned, and you'll probably be disappointed if you don't have him on your team. I also really love Khalil Lewis. He's been getting nearly as many targets as Cam Phillips. Eventually, those are going to turn into touchdowns, so really love Lewis this week and going forward. And I'm also willing to throw a flyer on Sam Mobley. He looked really good with his targets last week. Wouldn't be surprised if he was able to score at least once this week. Definitely a cheaper name if you guys are looking for a flyer pick in DFS, or just someone to throw into your flex if you lost Nelson Spruce and don't have anyone else. Sam Mobley is a name to look out for. Now, Sammy Coates is the name that keeps getting brought up because he keeps getting deep targets, but he isn't doing anything with them. He's drawing a lot of pass interference calls and stepping out of bounds a lot. Eventually, this chemistry is going to click, and Sammy Coates could very easily have a Cam Phillips type stat line, but he's very hard to trust until we see some improvement. If you're ballsy, you can throw him into some DFS lineups, but I'm going to play a wait and see until we have confidence that Sammy Coates is able to get it done in this league. Alright, and then the Roughnecks defense, I'm really trying to avoid both defenses in this game, but I'm okay with starting Houston if you have to, considering how much Dallas has been turning the ball over. They might be able to salvage, even though if they give up 30 points, they might be able to salvage your day with getting some sacks and some picks. So overall, not the worst defensive start this week. Alright, let's jump over to the Dallas Renegades. Okay, so looking at the quarterback here, now Landry Jones he's been pretty weird thus far. He's had, a couple first halves where he didn't really do much and then came alive in the second half of both of his last games. Still a pretty high average completion percentage, and this team is the number 1 team in terms of pass volume. They throw the ball more than any other team, and no team is allowing more fantasy points to the quarterback than Houston right now. Again, this is the highest over-under on the week. Landry Jones is an incredible quarterback option. Looking at the running backs, the best running back tandem in the league is Cameron Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar. The Roughnecks have been alright against the run, but the Renegades run their offense through their running backs in the pass game as well. Because of that, both Artis Payne and Dunbar need to be started in all formats. Now looking over at the wide receivers, as I mentioned already that both of these teams give up the most fantasy points to the opposing receivers, but this is one of the harder wide receiver cores to figure out because they aren't being used nearly as much, even though this team passes more than any other team. Jeff Badette is still due for a breakout game and has been targeted deep multiple times, but I get that he's been hard to trust. I would give him one more chance this week, especially given the over-under. If you have him, you can start him and probably can throw him into a few of your DFS lineups. Now, Flynn Nagel is also getting targets in the red zone, which shouldn't be ignored. He's a good start this week. They did sign Armonte Edwards from the CFL, but it's probably too soon to thrust him into your lineups until we know what his role is going to be. But I would venture to say that he's probably making sure that you can't start anyone else here. Jazz Ferguson is currently on hold until he shows us something, and then Josh Crockett is a Hail Mary play if you need a low ownership name for GPPs in DFS, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. You shouldn't need me to tell you to start Donald Parham, but Sean Price had a really rough outing last week. There should still be enough volume this week to keep him in the starters category. I'd be willing to go back to him, even though he only had one catch for 0 yards last week. And then I would say that the Dallas Renegades are probably the worst possible defense option this week. Really not going to be starting any defense against Houston until they show some signs of weakness. All right, so giving you guys a quick recap, we're expecting a lot of points in this game, and personally, I'm calling for the home team Renegades to win this one. I think Houston gets their first L in that loss column. We definitely are, expecting this to be a really close game. Could be a nail biter, but I think the Renegades are going to be able to get it done at home with that offense that hasn't been able to be stopped going against the Houston Roughnecks team that has shown a lot of holes on defense. I do think they'll still score a lot of points, but I think Dallas has a good enough team to keep up with them and should be able to squeak out a win in the end. And anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I do really appreciate it. Make sure you check out my website. We have tons of information on there for you guys for fantasy, whether you're playing in season long or DFS, so make sure you check that out. And hit that like and subscribe button for XFL content posted daily. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.